I am not only leaving my life on this court, I am leaving a judicial life that started 45 years ago.
Abella was appointed to the top court in 2004, but her career on the bench began long before that. In 1976, at just age 29, she became Canada's youngest judge, and it happened to be the first pregnant one as well. In 1984, she led the Federal Royal Commission on Equality in Employment. She coined the term employment equity and helped shape how the Supreme Court would deal with equality rights. Abella will officially, as I said, retire on Canada Day, but I had a chance to speak with her, sit down with her, about her groundbreaking career. Hi, Justice Abella. Nice of you to make the time.
Thank you for asking me. It's great to be here.
Good, and good to see you. As I was reading more about your life's work, it became pretty clear that a lot of it has been motivated, driven by your passion for equality, equity. I think that's fair to say that's been one of the things most important to you, and that started when you were the commissioner of the Royal Commission on Equality in Employment in 1984. How did that experience change you or influence the person, the judge you are today?
When I did the report, I pretty well thought I had a sense of what the Canadian landscape was all about. We'd come as immigrants, refugees to Canada. We were Jewish. We knew that there was discrimination, but I didn't personally experience it. And what struck me, and it's a very perceptive question, was how little I really understood about what life was for people who were disadvantaged and vulnerable because of how different they were. And it was interesting to me that everywhere I went in Canada, the issues for women were the same, the issues for Indigenous people was the same, visible minorities, persons with disabilities, obviously different disabilities. And I learned to confront my own stereotypes. And to understand how important humility is, in the sense that you really have to listen to what people are telling you. It was a very good judicial experience, that it's not about you, it's not about what you think you know, it's about really listening to what people are telling you. So that was where I understood what Canada felt like to 60% of the population, who wasn't me. And I carried it with me into writing the report. So you're quite right. That's exactly where it came from.
How would you say we are doing with equality in this country? You've seen it like over the past couple of years, the Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen protests for Indigenous people. Certainly the awareness seems to be different. How would you just broadly evaluate how we are doing as a country?
I've watched, without understanding why, a trajectory from the time we came here of increasing inclusion in Canada. It didn't go through the ups and downs. It was always sometimes quicker, urgently insistent cries from people in the 60s, much debate in the 70s, and then with the Charter we started to act in the 80s. But it was always increasing. So in the 70s there was very little discussion about Indigenous people or persons with disabilities. It was a decade we by and large gave to trying to redress the historic inequities that women faced. And then we started, the groups themselves were knocking at the door and saying, wait a minute, what about us? And we started to pay increasing attention to those groups we had left out of the mainstream, increasingly improving, should I say, we're never going to have absolute equality, but increasingly reducing inequality. So we're in a lot better place now than we were, but we have a long way to go.
Has it surprised you how much of those rights have made their way to the court to be defined, whether it be Indigenous rights inside the Constitution or other? Is it surprising that that's where that work seems to end up?
No, well, it doesn't just end up in the courts. So the relationship between the courts and the legislature is very clear, not in everybody's mind, but in my mind. You have a majoritarian institution in the legislature. People choose you because they think you are going to implement their wishes. So responding to the majority is what legislatures do. Courts are independent. We don't have to go back to anybody except our conscience and history. Will time judge this to have been the right decision? So why do people come to us? Because we are independent and because we are institutionally required to take their concerns into account. When Parliament gave us the charter, the country, what they said was, here are the minimal standards. You are the guardians of the Constitution. You tell us whether what we do is compliant with the charter. And so people go to the courts to see whether the state has in fact acted in accordance with the charter. So no, I'm not surprised. That's what we're there for.
Some politicians, as you know, though, view that as being activist. That you've heard that adjective described for yourself and other Supreme Court justices, that choose shaping legislation that much, shaping the country that much, is essentially judicial activism. What do you say to that critique?
Well, I mean, that's a term that kind of crept into the vocabulary in the 90s from the United States. I'd never heard it before. I still don't know what it means. And it took me a while to kind of decode what was going on. So it's a shorthand way of saying, I don't like what they did. I don't agree with it. So it's going to stay because you're never going to have everybody agreeing. In our decisions, there will be decisions that are more or less popular with different groups, but that's not what we're there for. Legislators worry about popularity. We don't.
I want to ask you about sort of the evolution of the court on issues. Medically assisted dying. I mean, I know you're not going to get into the cases, particularly prostitution, issues where you probably, when you started your career, could not have imagined that we would have ended up where we are on some of those, and possibly we'll be further along, particularly assisted dying. Is that surprising to you, that evolution? And is that the court reflecting society? Just, I don't know your thoughts on that.
There's a difference between stability and stagnation. Like, we cannot make decisions that are rooted in 100 years of tradition. And if we don't evolve, our job when you have a charter is to protect people's rights in the context of the time. So sometimes that will mean upholding precedent, and sometimes, as we said in assisted dying and in the prostitution case, 25 years after the original decision, we said, setting out a very clear test for when we were prepared to review our precedent. There may be new evidence, the times may change. We live in the world, should live in the world, should be aware of the world we live in, and move with the times when someone brings the case to us that feels like the right case to make change. So we don't always do it, but we did with Indigenous rights, we did in every area of rights. And I'm proud of that. That's a court being responsive to the public interest, not to public opinion, to the public interest in making sure that we stayed in touch with what the reality was for people who weren't us.
I want to ask you a little bit about the democratic consensus of the world, because you have talked about that and you've questioned, I think question's the right way to put it, questioned whether the United Nations is the right body to be helping us sort ourselves out in the world. What do you think is needed to address some of the concerns that you feel exist in terms of stability in our current time?
I actually don't even know how to begin to tackle what I see as the disintegration of the moral consensus that emerged from the Second World War. I had, like everybody else, enormous hopes in the United Nations, what it stood for. It was the institutional rebuke to the Second World War, where everybody said this is never going to happen again. And then it turned into a body that seemed to have lost, the General Assembly seemed to have lost its capacity to develop norms for the world, which it was supposed to do, that were fair and permitted totalitarianism and the impunity of human rights abuses all over the world. It was heartbreaking to see. What's the answer? You know, how do you get leadership, moral leadership, in a world where people are retrenching? So I really don't know how to tackle it. All I can tell you is it seems to me to be getting worse and worse, because there is no place where I hear a loud, consistent voice saying that is not acceptable. That is not the way we should have a global approach to small m morality or politics. You cannot extinguish people's rights with impunity and get away with it, but they can and they do.
And what do you think Canada's moral leadership role is in the world in that situation?
I mean, I don't think size is determinative. I think Canada, like all countries, has Achilles' heels. You know, I mean, nobody can walk into the international arena and say, I am perfect, and therefore I'm going to be a leader in all of this. But I would be hard-pressed to find any countries that have done a better job of consistently protecting rights and working towards making sure that we're increasingly doing what we should do to protect those rights than Canada. So moral leadership is a question of taking it, and then it takes the audience and it takes the speaker, and then persuading people to follow. But we did it Lester Pearson did it in the 60s, and I believe that Canada is, if not recognized as such, although I think it probably is in many places, should be seen as a central leader in trying to bring consensus on these questions.
When you say that, I mean, I take your point, but do you see that perhaps Indigenous people would not feel that way, racialized people?
No, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
There are people who could rightly point a finger and say, but look what's happened here. But that isn't the point. Of course, no country has done it all perfectly. And yes, there's much to be done and addressed. That doesn't mean that Canada isn't in a better position, because it is addressing these issues, to be on the moral high ground and take a leadership role.
What will you miss the most?
All of it. I've loved it.
Yeah.
I've loved being a judge. I've loved my colleagues.
You even love the red robe, the Santa Claus robe.
No, gotta say, my Santa Claus outfit is something I will not miss. Oh my God. But it looks good in a picture, doesn't it?
It does look good in a picture.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And it's only ceremonial. But I'll miss my colleagues. I'll miss the chance to think about some of the most interesting and complicated justice questions of my time. And I'll miss being in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. But I'm a great believer in mandatory retirement for judges.
You are.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it has nothing to do with can she still do it or can he still do it. It has to do with recognition that there's a sell-by date for all of us. None of us is indispensable.
Yes.
We can all and will be and should be replaced by somebody who's different from us. I mean, I've had 11 new colleagues on the court. Everybody brings something new to the court. It's fresh blood. But I think institutional renewal is good, as is institutional experience. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a mix of the two, that's best for an institution. And it's my turn to go and make room for somebody else. I've loved being on that stage, and I've loved being in the audience, which is what my career has been.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's ahead, but I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been lovely. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.